Uh-oh, it looks like Phyllis is back. And it looks like this time she's having another frustrating day. It appears on the other side of the line is the client wondering where that thing that she promised is, and she's waiting for someone else to finish their part. You know that thing that someone on your team was supposed to do to be fully coordinated so that you could deliver the outcome you needed to the client? But somehow, even though it's not your fault, it still lands on you as your responsibility? Yeah, that's what Phyllis is experiencing here. Have you ever had one of those experiences yourself? If so, then I think you're going to like this episode. Those situations where it's not your fault, and yet somehow it's still your responsibility. You know the ones I'm talking about. Part of the issue is when something is more important to you than it is to someone else, and it causes an imbalance. And yet you have to wait for that other person, where it's not as important, gets their thing done in order for you to get the thing you need to get done. Those are called dependencies. And if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're dependent on someone else, which is very often in this day and age for career and business, then this episode will be for you. Fortunately, I keep a high performance practice on the shelf for just such an occasion. Welcome to episode number 4 in our 5-part series. This one, retain next steps. Always you're gonna wanna retain next steps when that differential exists and something has to get done and it's your responsibility and it's more important to you than the person you're depending on. If you've been following me for any time, you know I'm all about setting NEXTpectations in life, finance, career, and business. And this topic, Retain Next Steps, is part of a 5-part series that's really aimed at lighting up career and business. In career, how to get unstuck and get ahead. In business, with your teams and organization, how to shorten the cycle times to success. The dependencies you have in your role may be a little bit different depending on how your organization or how your role is set up. It could be that your role feels much more like a ping pong game. So maybe in your role, it feels like you do your thing and then the next person does theirs and they get it back to you and then you get it back to them and they get it back to you. This is oftentimes what people who work directly for one person will sometimes report their experiences like. Clearly in those situations, you're doing your part and you're dependent on them doing theirs. Another one, which is just a variation of the theme, might feel a little more complex. Perhaps it feels more like that relay race I sometimes talk about. And in that scenario, it's a little more complicated, but the concept's the same. You do your thing, and somewhere along the way, everybody else is coordinating to do theirs, just like a relay race. Maybe you're at the beginning, maybe you're in the middle, maybe you're at the end. Another comparison for how it might feel like your activities work is that perhaps it feels more like a soccer game. And in this scenario, it may feel more sequential, much like a soccer game where you're marching towards the same ultimate goal, but you're depending on each other to get this thing all the way through in a sequence. And even though you have all of these dependencies on all these other folks, however your process works, you make sure that you retain next steps by always keeping a hook in the next step that you can help to advance what it is they need to be doing, so that those dependencies are something you're going to manage. So wherever you're at or whatever sport metaphor you want to use, I'd say retaining next steps has the hook in it because it's more like fishing than it is like any other sport. You want to be able to cast out what it is somebody needs to get done that you're dependent on, but always keep a hook of some sort of tether to it that makes sure that you retain the next step. Now, usually I'm not a big fan of promoting any kind of strategy that requires you be responsible for somebody else's getting something done. I hate that feeling. It's an awful feeling. However, if you're looking to get unstuck and get ahead in your career, and you have dependencies where you're counting on someone else, you may have to do this. In a perfect world, you get your whole team to be in on this series of high performance and everybody's doing it together. But if that's not the case and you find you're having to go it alone, or you're having to work with a team that has folks in it that isn't always dependable or reliable on those dependencies, then you're going to want to work with retaining next steps for you. And that's because at the end of the day, that differential that I talked about before, where it's more important to you that something gets done than it appears to be to the other person. I'm sure you've received these kinds of text messages yourself, whether it's your dentist saying, hey, just wanted to confirm that you're going to be on time for your appointment and make sure you're 10 minutes early to get all signed in, or maybe the cable company giving you that really precise window of opportunity when they're going to come on by. On one hand, these could look like they're doing you a favor. Like, isn't that nice? They're reminding me. But actually, it's not about you. They're not doing it for you. They're doing it for themselves to protect themselves against you. you flaking on them and not showing up, and now all of a sudden they have a really expensive time slot that's not being utilized because they didn't remind you. Now in a perfect world, you wouldn't need a reminder, but enough people don't show up that it reminds them they have to remind someone else. And that's really the reason why building a practice around retaining some version of a next step puts you in the control of at least having some chance of maintaining responsibility. It's already bad enough you're having to design a practice to accommodate for someone else not doing their thing. But if you're going to do it, operationalize it. Make it work inside your world. Make it work easily for you to replicate time and time again sustainably. Let's talk briefly about some of the different ways you can build it into your practices if you don't already. So there's different ways that you can retain next steps. First off, make sure you're clear what the next step is. Not the next step the other person's supposed to do. Usually you know that. Oh, I gave the paperwork to the client. They're supposed to fill it out. No, it's know the next step you can retain in that. So for example, if you've got a client and you've given them paperwork and you're waiting for them to fill it back out, well then your retained next step isn't them filling it out, that's their job. Your retained next step is reaching out to them to let them know that it's time, or to let them know some of their days have passed. One of the things I like to do is kill them with kindness for the first couple of tries. For example, calling a client and saying, hey, I noticed it had been a few days since I'd given you that paperwork. I just wanted to check in and make sure that you didn't have any questions that I might be able to answer for you. And if so, let me be of help. One of the ways I find comfortable to express it is always make it about the other person, not about you. So never tell a client, well, because I don't trust you, I'm going to go ahead and call you next week and bug you to make sure you actually get that paperwork back to me. Intuitively, you get that that does not work well. However, what do you say? So one of the things you can say is, sometimes folks have questions on the paperwork. And if for any reason you do, don't hesitate to give me a call. When do you think is an appropriate amount of time till I touch base to see if you have any questions? And so if you don't have a hard deadline, then sometimes they'll say to you, let's say it's Wednesday of this week right now, and they say, I think I can get this filled out and back to you by Monday. And you'll say, great. I'll reach out to you early next week just to touch base, see if you have any questions if I haven't already received the paperwork. Now you've set up expectations. Remember in the first episode in the 5-part series? First touch expectations, first touch communications. That was me just creating a first touch expectation that I'll reach out by next week. Now nobody's offended, nobody feels like you're checking in on them. It just sounds like help because you phrased it in such a way. There's lots of ways that you can operationalize this practice to make it as low cost and easy for you to do as possible. You can, for example, do it through a dialogue. Maybe you're going to see someone in person, perhaps in a virtual web meeting, or just pick up a phone to call them. Maybe you can send a text message like my dentist example that I shared before, or perhaps you can send an email. And you can do this manually, although you can also create some automated assist. So for example, you can assist the automation. There's automated text messaging. There's also templates built into almost all the email platforms that give you a ready-made email for regular routine next steps that you retain so that you can just automatically have them ready at hand. Now, as you do this, be careful with the automation that it doesn't get too impersonal. If you really want to get this humming, then you want to automate it in your calendar. You can put it in your calendar and set it to remind you on a regular basis, maybe even set aside a certain time of day that you follow these up. The important part is that anytime you have a dependency where you're counting on somebody else, but you're responsible and it's more important to you, have something that triggers you to remind you, maybe even triggers you which way you wanted to reach out to them. The important part is, to the extent that you can, try to personalize it. Try to not make it feel like, hey, I set an automatic reminder to check in on you because I don't trust you. That doesn't usually go over terribly well. Instead, what you can do is you can create a template in your email that is the way that you retain the next step. But when you open up the template, personalize it a little. Put their name, put a sentence at the top that checks in on them, especially if they're the client. Even when working with colleagues that are making it difficult to sometimes get things done, you can still try the kindness approach. What I recommend you avoid is, I'd avoid anything like, hey, you better get that out there because I have all this evidence in my emails that this is not my fault and I'm going to let the boss know that it's your fault. That does not go over well in any circumstance. Instead, if you have to bring out the reason for people to get their stuff done, don't make it you like you're the bad guy. Make it whatever it is they really do care about. For example, the deadline is closely approaching for this particular project, and I would hate for us to get to that deadline and you'd be caught off guard. So I just wanted to get this email to you so that you had plenty of time to get this done. Let me know if you need any help whatsoever. Either way, if you work to come alongside them, show them the consequences there are the ones you're trying to help protect them from. then it can look like you're just being a great teammate. And if it gets you what you want to be successful, well, guess who's going to shine? You're going to shine, because you're no longer going to miss on your what by whens because other people have forgotten to get theirs done. Hopefully you're not in one of those environments where you're really having to cover yourself and make sure that people are doing their job so that you can do yours. I'm going to presume that maybe you're in a team that's really highly coordinated. And if that's the case, that's great. Still retain next steps then for clients or for supervisors and managers. Retain them, because even if the ball is in their court, the ball's still got some piece in your court, which means there's something you can still affect. This comes from real life practice with my own teams. When I would check in, for example, to find out how's a client doing, and they'd say, oh, well, the next step was for them to do X, Y, Z, and I haven't heard from them in the last couple of weeks. I realized they didn't retain a next step. And so all they had to do was say, oh, as we're doing this, I'll go ahead and set a reminder in my calendar to make sure to check in with the client in 3 business days. That seems about the right amount of time for that particular thing to get done, and just see if they have any questions. And if I don't reach them, I might check in again in a week's time. So for example, you can put it in the calendar to retain a next step that in, say, 3 business days to just check in, see if the client has any questions. Maybe give them a call or send them an email. And a few days after that, maybe you can check in to see if there's anything that they're having as a blockade, or if they needed any additional time to extend, and could you count on that maybe by the end of the week. You'll have to gauge this, every client or every supervisor situation, every teammate and colleague, a little bit different. So you have to gauge what works in your organization. Whenever you find yourself counting on somebody else that doesn't appear to be getting that next step done, then making sure, whether it's internal with your own team or external with clients, that you retain next steps can help you get unstuck and get ahead in your career. And if you do this with your teams, it'll help you shorten the cycle times to success. Try it on for yourself. And when you do, feel free to leave comments down below, because I'd love to hear how it went. If you've enjoyed this, feel free to like. If you want to be alerted of more of these videos, feel free to subscribe. Remember, this is just one of a 5-part series, so be sure to check out the whole high performance pack. Until next time, set NEXTpectations. Hey Phyllis, while I got you here and we're waiting, I know you're complaining about your back not feeling so good. You might want to look at your posture. You're kind of slouching a bit there. I would imagine that would hurt after a while.